Hi everyone, my name is Shelly and welcome to my first video here on my photography YouTube channel. If you guys don't know, I also do have a beauty channel that I've had for about 10 years or so. And so if you guys are from my from my beauty channel, what's up? Welcome to my new photography channel. So for those of you who don't know, I have been into photography since I started YouTube, and just recently I have been really taking things up a notch with my photography over the last couple years, which is why I wanted to make this YouTube channel based on my whole experience around photography, all of my equipment, tips and tricks that I've learned for editing, behind the scenes. Literally everything that has to do with photography is going to go on this channel in hopes to help other people who are interested in photography learn things that I've learned over the years. So with all of that said, I think that it would be best to open up this channel by sharing with you guys my budget equipment that I started photography with, that I started my YouTube channel with, and that I've used for honestly the majority of my photography life. I've used all this equipment basically for the last 7 years, and it has gotten me by so far. Throughout this video, I will also be putting pictures and examples of what this equipment back here has done for me, because I understand that photography is a very expensive hobby. It's a very expensive thing to get into, and it can be overwhelming with how much information is out there. So I'm hoping that I will be able to kind of just get to the point with a lot of the things that you guys are searching for. But of course, before we get into my budget equipment that I think will be beneficial for you guys to start out with, if you could do me a huge favor on this new channel of mine, if you could click subscribe and turn on your post notifications so you get notified every time I upload. Also in the comment section down below, feel free to leave me any photography questions or video requests, because I would love to fulfill that for you guys. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive into some budget equipment I think could be useful for those of you who are starting out. So the most important thing as a photographer, you are going to need a camera, you're going to need a camera body, and this here is my first camera ever. My mom bought me this, I believe, when I was 18, and this is the Canon EOS Rebel T3. This camera is about $300. I don't believe Canon makes this camera anymore actually. I think the equivalent to this camera is the Canon EOS Rebel T6, which is still around the $300 mark. So this camera is a $300 starter DSLR camera. I used this for most of my entire photography career. I even used it up into photo shooting people and shooting for Style and Society magazine. So, if you guys are just starting out in photography, I promise you, you do not need to buy an expensive camera to get quality photos. I highly recommend checking out the Canon EOS Rebel series. These cameras are very powerful, and they also produce a really, really good quality image. So when you buy one of these cameras, it comes with this lens, which is an 18 to 55 millimeter. This is the kit lens, and to be honest, it's not that great. So when I say I used this camera for most of my photography career, I did not use this lens for most of it. So I've started with the kit lens, as most people do, but you do want to upgrade to something a little bit better. This is just your standard basic lens, and the images are just pretty mediocre in my opinion, but there are really great lenses that you guys can buy for a budget. The first lens I recommend is the one that I'm filming this video on. This lens that I'm using is the Canon 50mm 1.8 aperture, and it costs $125. Let me just stop right there. It costs $125. Every photographer, I'm pretty sure, has this lens, the Canon 50mm 1.8, because one, it's $125. Two, the image quality just speaks for itself. Currently, right now, with my whole setup, I do use the 50mm 1.8 a lot. It's my main lens that I use for my portrait shoots. I will throw up a bunch of pictures that are taken on this lens, the $125 50mm 1.8 aperture lens. This honestly is just a staple. Every photographer needs to have this lens, and probably does have this lens in their kits. So if you guys have a little bit more than $125 that you can spend, the next budget lens I recommend is the Sigma 30mm 1.4 aperture art lens. This was my first big camera purchase. This lens costs about $400 now. I believe when I bought it, it was around $500. So for me, that was a really big deal. But this lens, for being a $400 lens, on a $300 camera, the image quality on this is so good. Sigma lenses are honestly like some of my favorite lenses, but this lens produced really sharp, really clear, and really professional looking images. So throughout the majority of my photography career, I used a Canon EOS Rebel T3 with the Sigma 30mm 1.4 art lens together, and that's where the majority of my pictures came from, were from these two pieces of equipment, which were both budget, $300 plus $400, put it together, a $700 camera setup. Like, it doesn't get any cheaper than that. I mean, it does, maybe to like $600, but like still. Okay, so now moving into lighting equipment. This is probably something you're not going to need right off the bat. Most beginner photographers start out learning how to use the sun and trying to figure out that type of lighting. I also personally like using the sun a lot more than using artificial lights such as studio lights or speed lights. But if you ever find yourself in a low light setting, or if you do night photography, you're going to need an external flash. You're going to need a speed light, and this, I promise you, is like all you really need. So if you are looking for a quality budget speed light, this is the one that I'm using, and this is the one I actually recommend. I went back and forth between the Canon speed light, this speed light, which one's better, which one's not, and I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna go and test out the Yongnuo speed light. I've watched a million YouTube videos about it and so many good reviews, and now here I am, another good review on the Yongnuo speed light. So this is the Yongnuo Speedlight YN563. This costs $66, so it's under $100, and it gets the job done. Like, okay, I'm gonna throw up some nighttime photos that I've taken with this, and I'll just let it speak for itself. $66, I took those photos with this budget, right? So it does the whole thing. You guys can tilt it, spin it. It's just like your basic speed light. It works. It has a reflective white card in there. So I know that there are cheaper speed lights out there for around $30 that do produce the same quality of light. However, I just personally think that the build of this speed light and the whole quality of it in general is worth the $30 extra. Like, I really do enjoy the digital screen that this has when you turn it on versus the manual one that comes on the super cheap one. So I'm all here for the digitalness, just that extra, you know, step. So yeah, for those of you who are in the market for a speed light, I definitely recommend checking out the Yongnuo YN563. I'm honestly not going to upgrade from this until this one fails me, because this one has done the job, and I don't feel there's a need for me to invest money into something that isn't broken. Like, this really does the job. So, and that concludes my budget equipment that I began photography with. I really hope that it helps some of you guys who are starting out in photography kind of know where to begin. I am just showing you guys the stuff that I personally used and found success with, because this really truly is my equipment. This is what I used for years. This is what I was able to grow with, and I really hope that you guys can, you know, take the time to learn how to use your cheap budget equipment and grow as a photographer. One thing that I think is very important for me to mention about getting quality images with budget equipment is post-processing. When I learned that the majority of photographers post-processed and edited their photos, it was just like this revolutionary, like mind-blown moment. I used to think photographers would take pictures, like amazing pictures straight out the camera, just like shoot and it would be amazing. That's really not how it works. Most people use Photoshop or Lightroom to post-process their photos. So if I could make one really big recommendation to you guys who are just starting out in photography, buy a cheap DSLR, buy an affordable lens, learn how to use your lighting, and then learn how to use Photoshop or Lightroom or both. Because post-processing is going to take your decent photo and you can transform it into an outstanding piece of photography just by learning post-processing. And that's really what took my photography to a whole nother level. So if you guys really want to learn how to just take your budget equipment and make it 10 times better, 100% learn how to use Photoshop and learn how to use Lightroom. So I'm currently working on a photo editing guide for you guys. I'm still trying to figure out a few things. If and when it's done, it will be linked in the description box down below, but I'm basically trying to show you guys from start to finish exactly the entire Photoshop process that I go through while editing my pictures. So I believe that that's everything that I have for today's video. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to click subscribe and turn on your post notifications so you don't miss any more of my videos. If you guys want to check out my photography, follow me on Instagram at shopbyshelly. If you guys have any video requests, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below and I will make sure to get to that. Bye!